Imagine a young woman just 17 years old, full of dreams, energy, and a zest for life, being brutally ripped from her routine to face one of the most brutal cases in Japanese criminal history. This is the story of Junko Furuta, a name that still sends chills down our spines and raises questions about human evil and society's failure to protect its victims. Junko was an ordinary student, described by her classmates as intelligent, kind, and dedicated. She had good grades, worked part-time, and dreamed of building a stable future. Nothing in her life indicated that she would become the protagonist of one of the most barbaric crimes ever recorded. It all began in November 1988, when Junko was returning home after a day of studying. It was on this seemingly normal path that her destiny was interrupted. A group of young criminals linked to the Yakuza spotted her and decided to target her in a brutal trap. One of the young men, Hiroshi Miyano, known for his connections with local gangs, approached Junko pretending to need help. This simple ploy was enough to lead her into a dead end. By the time she realized she was in danger, it was too late. The kidnappers took her to an ordinary house in a residential neighborhood of Misato, Tokyo. At first glance, no one could have imagined that behind those walls lay a veritable chamber of horrors. It was there that Junko was imprisoned for 44 days. At first, the kidnappers justified their hiding her as a temporary abduction, but the situation quickly spiraled out of control and escalated into something much worse. Junko was subjected to constant and unimaginable abuse. During these days of torment, Junko suffered unimaginable physical and psychological abuse. Later accounts of the case describe beatings, cigarette burns, and even fire, as well as repeated rapes by dozens of men invited by her kidnappers. Most disturbingly, neighbors heard screams and suspicious noises coming from the house. Even so, they chose not to get involved. The community's silence became complicit in the young woman's suffering. Junko, in her innocence and desperation, even begged for her release. But the captors' cruelty increased as time passed. They reveled in her pain, treating her like a disposable object. As the days passed, Junko's body began to fail. She could no longer walk properly, was malnourished, and could barely speak. Still, the attackers showed no mercy. One of the most shocking aspects of this case is that the parents of one of the kidnappers knew a girl was being held inside the house. However, out of fear of the gang and their son's reputation, they pretended to ignore what was happening. Junko was forced to call her parents and tell them she was fine, that she had run away from home just to avoid being searched for. This cruel manipulation only prolonged her torment. The kidnappers forced her to dance, sing, and act normally, even when her body was no longer strong. It was as if they wanted to erase her humanity, reducing her to a toy. The torture methods intensified over time. Junko suffered broken bones, was starved for days, and was even stuffed into a freezer. The details revealed in court records are so shocking that they still scar those who read them today. Despite everything, Junko still demonstrated impressive resilience. Even after weeks of torture, she sometimes tried to hold on, perhaps believing that one day she would be rescued. But fate was relentless. In January 1989, after 44 days of suffering, Junko's body gave out. She died in atrocious conditions, leaving behind a story marked by indifference and cruelty. Fearing the consequences, the attackers placed her body in a 200-liter drum filled with concrete. This container was then abandoned as if it were just trash. The discovery only came about because one of the kidnappers, later arrested for another crime, confessed to Junko's murder. That's how the police found her body and began their investigation. The case shocked Japan. The brutality with which Junko was treated shocked the entire country, sparking debates about youth violence, gangs, and society's responsibility when warning signs are ignored. The four main suspects were arrested and tried. However, the sentences were considered too light for the severity of the crime, as they were all under 20 at the time. This sparked outrage and public outcry. Many questioned how a judicial system could allow such a monstrosity to be punished so leniently. This case became a landmark in the debate over reforming Japanese laws regarding minors. Junko Furuta's story is also remembered as a cruel example of how social indifference can perpetuate tragedies. If neighbors, colleagues, or even family members had acted, perhaps her life could have been saved. However, silence spoke louder, and Junko became a victim not only of her kidnappers, but of an entire network of omission. Today, more than 3 decades later, Junko's name still resonates as a symbol of injustice. Books, documentaries, and news reports continue to bring her memory to light. For many, telling her story is a way to give a voice to the young woman who was so brutally silenced. It's a way to prevent her from being forgotten. The case also serves as a warning about the need to intervene when faced with signs of abuse. It's not enough to hear a scream or notice something strange and turn away. Silence can cost lives. Every detail of Junko Furuta's story reveals the darkest side of human nature. The ability of 16 to 18-year-olds to commit such cruelty is a disturbing reminder of what we are capable of when empathy disappears. At the same time, the negligence of adults and authorities shows how society can fail to protect its most vulnerable members. Junko, who dreamed only of a simple and happy life, ended up having her existence stolen in an unimaginable way. Her pain cannot be reversed, but her memory lives on as a denunciation of cruelty. Every time we remember this story, we reinforce the importance of not normalizing signs of violence, because violence, when ignored, multiplies and destroys innocent lives. Junko Furuta never had the chance to tell her own story, but today, by telling her story, we give her a space of memory and resistance against oblivion. And may his memory also be a call. Let us never close our eyes to the pain of others, because the price of silence can be a lost life. Did you enjoy the content? Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more mind fragments where we reveal what many prefer to ignore.